Tonight, I'm going to brew a lager, and in 5 weeks, I will be drinking it, and I will be drinking it gone. You might think that that sounds crazy, but I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna teach you some tips and tricks to turn a lager around as quickly as you possibly can. The first trick of the trade is going to be this guy right here, where I can hook CO2 up to here. This is a 15 psi blow off, and then that's going to dampen any yeast esters that might come out of my fermentation. If you don't have something like this, you don't have a conical or something that you can pressurize, no big deal. There's 4 more steps in which we can make this lager turn around as fast as possible. So this is how we're going to set up the conical for this brew. I got my racking arm that goes into the conical, lets me know its orientation. That's going to help me get the maximum amount of beer out of my conical. And then onto that goes my 1.5-inch butterfly valve, which allows me to get the beer out of the fermenter. And then normally where the temperature probe goes, it says a small batch, and I don't use my sample port, so I'm going to block that top hole. Next comes my thermal well, which like I said would usually be up top there, but it's a smaller batch, and I'm going to mount it a little bit lower to get a better accurate reading on my temperatures. Next is going to be the sight glass down below. This is kind of important because aside from gravity readings, I like to be able to see the fermentation taking place. For dumping my yeast in my trube, I am going to put the butterfly valve onto the bottom there. You can mount it above the sight glass and collect stuff into the sight glass if you want to. It's up to you, your choice. And then this is the heavy hitter. This is where I can mount CO2 onto my conical and allow for the esters to be lessened. And then finally, I'm going to put the elbow for when I dump my trube and yeast into my collection bucket. So, taking a page right from Mash Maker. Aerate well. Too little dissolved oxygen can lead to higher sulfur production during fermentation, which will not taste delicious 4 weeks from now when we want to be packaging this beer. I just brewed an extract beer, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to dump it into my fermenter, which has a little bit of volume of water into it, and then I'm going to take my hose and I'm going to spray jet into it, and that's going to aerate it really well for me. Step 2. Pitch cold. Add yeast when the wort temp is approximately 45 to 48 degrees Fahrenheit. This will suppress ester formation without shutting down the yeast metabolism entirely. My temperature is at an acceptable level for me to pitch my yeast, so I'm going to dump that in there. It's been about 12 hours since I pitched my yeast. I got a bunch of hot particles sitting in the bottom. I can see in my sight glass in the bottom, and I'm going to hit my conical with some CO2, and I'm going to put a nice blanket of CO2 on the top of there. This is going to start my pressure fermentation. Step 4. Increase temp as fermentation progresses. Once fermentation is well underway, begin gradually increasing the ferment temperature in small daily increments up to approximately 58 degrees. Besides speeding up the uptake of diacetyl by the yeast as well as the last bit of attenuation, sulfur and other compounds will be off-gassed more readily. Alright, we got our quick lagering lager. We have our quick lager being kegged right now. The real step 4 is to cold crash. When gravity is stable and diacetyl is below the taste perception threshold, Drop the temperature to 33 to 37 for clarification. Whereas this portion of the traditional lagering phase would last several weeks or more, in this regimen, the beer can be ready to package in under 2 weeks. So I don't really cold crash into the conical. What I do is I just throw it in the keg, and then I throw it into my keezer, and then I wait for 2 weeks really, so then it'll carb up, and it'll also be lagering during that phase. So that's what we are doing with this particular beer.
Buck 85, double chin, line me up, get to picking, I'm that dude, window licking. Tastes like schnozberries, hanging with the green fairies. Yo, there's something about these Marys. Back to basics, let's face it, I don't sell bricks. Yo, I push whips, pulling rabbits out of hats. Yeah, I got tricks, no posse, no clicks. Serious 920 shit surrounded by hicks. Let them swing, let them hang, now you're kicking it with sketch neck to gang. Please, fuck your generation, throw up defenses, no hesitation. Only focus is lyrics and articulation.
Ooh, Fest beer.
Flies all over this bitch.
Berliner Weiss. First of all, let's talk about lagers. They're supposed to be cleaner fermenting, less estery. Maybe there's like a slight floral ester to them. Some of them don't have any esters, which are the yeast that I prefer to use when I brew my lagers. I use a Mexican cerveza lager yeast most of the time. Less esters, I guess, let the malt and the hops shine through a little bit more, and that's kind of what's going on with this beer. There's nothing really getting in the way of the malt flavor. I guess one of the best examples that I can give of an ale versus a lager is a personal experience of one time when I brewed a 10-gallon batch of a pale ale, and I split it, 5 gallons going in to ale, and 5 gallons of it I made into a lager. And I threw the lager into my keezer, and I didn't touch it until the ale was gone. And the ale was a very good ale. And then when I tapped the lager, I was actually thinking that I wasn't going to like it as much, but it was amazing, the difference by technique and yeast used. It was like all the lines were just defined. Like with an ale, there's some esters that kind of blur the lines, and then with a lager, it's just defined. This it is, here's the malt, here's the hops, and it just tasted better. I was very happy and kind of shocked at how that beer turned out. When I first started brewing lagers, what I would do is I would brew them. I would let them ferment to about 80%, and then I would start the diacetyl rest. I'd bring it up in temperature to about room temp, maybe 62, maybe 65, and then let it sit there for a day or maybe 3, depending on if I'm dry hopping during that time. And then I would crash it down to 35 degrees slowly, 5 degrees at a time, in an increment. So maybe I would do that every 12 hours or every single day. So I mean, that takes a long time to crash it down. And then I would keg it, and then I would throw it into my beer cellar for however long determined by the gravity. So if it was a 1040 beer, I would do it for 4 weeks. 1050, I would do it for 5 weeks. So again, that's a really, really long process. And then I think I first kind of heard of fast lagering on the Brewing Network podcast, and Tasty said something on there. And I'm like, well, that just seems so much easier. I'm just going to try it, doing it that way, and we'll just see what happens. And so far, I've been really pleased with this technique. This particular beer was like the first one that I did pressure fermenting to. I just kind of got to a point where I could do that, so I figured why not try it out. So the difference in the process is so much less time consuming. And I've heard people say that it's an effective way of lagering, but it's not as good. I think it's fine. I think it's absolutely fine. This particular beer, it's crisp. I can taste the malt. There wasn't a very high hopping rate to this, and it had some noble hops. I can kind of get some of the noble hops character in there too. But that was kind of made to be like an American adjunct lager, and that's exactly what it tastes like to me. But I'm sorry to say it, but better. I mean, I can taste so much more of the malt flavor to it. So, does this beer taste like a lager? Yes, I can say yes, absolutely. Because like I said, the lines are defined. I can taste the malt, I can taste the hops, but they're completely on two different levels. That I can just differentiate them. Where if I brew this as an ale, I could taste it, but it probably just wouldn't be as defined, like I said. So this is the way that I brew all my lagers, and I think that you should go ahead and give it a try. If you haven't done it yet, you go ahead and comment down below and let me know how it goes. But this is how I will continue to do all my lagers. I'm not a very patient man, and I'm also kind of just a shrug my shoulders kind of brewer. Whatever happens, happens, and as long as I like how the end result is, then why not keep doing it? So yeah, so cheers. Thanks for watching.